Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. I'm Mike Sprague. I'm the director of the Polar Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and we very much appreciate you joining us today for what I think will be a very important discussion. This is the latest in a series of programs focused on the important topic of Arctic research. Today, we specifically explore Arctic research infrastructure and capabilities in North America. And since 2017, we've held over 24 distinct and unique Arctic research discussions or programs, many of which held with partners that you'll see represented today: the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, Sandia National Laboratories, UIC Science, the government of Greenland, including a very important program we held a while ago with Greenland Research Council, the government of Canada, and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Over the last few years, many of our Arctic research programs have been held in partnership with members of the Nordic Council, the Kingdom of Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Finland. I say this all because we've all rallied around a sense of urgency, the need for more research to inform policy, but also the need for the infrastructure to support the research that supports good policy, sound policy development and implementation. In discussing public policy issues related to Arctic research and infrastructure has been important, but that importance seems to have taken on a heightened sense of urgency most recently. As we've witnessed just a few weeks ago, the polar regions are experiencing dramatic change, from melting and collapsing ice sheets and glaciers to the unfortunate and astounding report just a couple of days ago by the National Snow and Ice Data Center that the Arctic sea ice extent fell to the second lowest annual minimum on record. It is my hope that discussions and insights like those about to be offered by today's speakers will help us to better address the needs of the Arctic research community at this most critical time. Before we start, I'd like to thank Dr. Lori Parrott, Atmospheric Science Manager at Sandia National Laboratories, for convening today's group of experts, and Michaela Stith, our Polar Institute Program Assistant, for supporting this effort. And I want to thank today's speakers and our two moderators who will help us navigate today's discussion. Our good friend and colleague, Dr. John Farrell, the Executive Director of the United States Arctic Research Commission, and our friend and colleague, the Honorable Sherry Goodman, our Senior Fellow at the Polar Institute, and she also serves as a Senior Fellow in the Environmental Change and Security Program at the Wilson Center. And now I'm pleased to turn the program over to Sherry Goodman. Sherry?
Thank you very much, Mike, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And let me echo my thanks to all of the speakers and the participants and all of you in the audience today, and a special warm welcome to and thank you to our colleagues at Sandia National Lab, who have been our great partners in this work. Well, Mike teed it up. This week we've got some more devastating news about changes in our polar regions and the second lowest sea ice extent ever recorded in the Arctic. That comes after a summer of Siberian heat waves reaching over 100 degrees, and as was remarked recently about the heat in Southern California with the wildfires, that we shouldn't think of this as just the hottest day of recent times, but perhaps the coolest day going forward. And I think that's unfortunately how we need to think about the Arctic as well, which is not that these heat waves are exceptional, but they become the new normal for the future, which is why it is so very, very important that we have a better understanding of Arctic change and Arctic environmental change, as climate change is causing collapse of permafrost, about which we still know not enough, retreat of sea ice, and long-term warming of the ocean. Now, why are we doing this with respect to North America? Because if you look at the map that is on your screen, you see there is a North American Arctic geographically. And that's why it's so important for us to better understand and work with our Canadian colleagues, Greenland, Denmark, as well as all of our colleagues in the US, to understand and develop further a North American Arctic. It's a framework for building cooperative policies and capabilities, not only for Arctic research and development, which we're going to talk about today, but also because this feeds directly into the kind of domain awareness that we are going to need in the future as this region becomes more navigable and as we work to reduce risks of an accident, contamination, or security incident. Understanding, having the observations, and having the infrastructure necessary to observe and provide information to researchers and policymakers becomes ever more urgent. So with us today to discuss their particular efforts in this North American Arctic research infrastructure, we have a terrific panel of 5 here. Let me introduce each of them by name, and then they'll share with you some comments about their own work. First, we have Josephine Nyman, who is the head of the Department of the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources and chair of Greenland's Research Council. Second, we will have Bettina Ovgaard, who is the chief of the J9 Civil Military Cooperation and Science Liaison Officer in the Danish Joint Arctic Command. A terrific pair. And then our Canadian colleague is Martin Fortier. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Martin. He's the executive director of the Sentinel North and assistant to the vice rector, Research and Innovation, University Laval, Quebec City in Canada. And we have 2 from Alaska, Dr. Nettie LaBelle-Hamer, who is at the University of Alaska Fairbanks and who I've been privileged to work with for a number of years, and Naruk Harcharek, who is at the Barrow Arctic Research Center, and we're very pleased to have all of you today. John, do you have some opening comments there now before we turn over to our panelists? Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sherry. Yes, I just to give a few remarks on why we're looking at the North American Arctic as opposed to any other part of the Arctic. As some of you may recall, in 2015, when the US assumed the 2-year rotating chairmanship of the Arctic Council, it had the theme One Arctic, shared opportunities, challenges, and responsibilities. So in that viewpoint, it was the Arctic was just one. But there are other ways to consider the Arctic. Some, for example, might argue that there are 3 Arctics. There's a North American Arctic, which is Canada, Alaska, and Greenland, which we'll be talking about today. There's also a European or Scandinavian Arctic, and then finally an Asian or a Russian Arctic. Those are 3, that's another way to slice and dice the region. So the North American Arctic includes a vast region extending from the northern portions of Alaska, across northern Canada and into Greenland, as the map shows. And if you define North America based on geology, as I am a geologist, the North American tectonic plate also includes the western half of Iceland and even a touch of the Russian Far East. But for this discussion, we'll stick to those 3 that we've already mentioned. The major bodies of water that are involved in this discussion include the Arctic and North Atlantic Oceans, the Bering Sea, and the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas, and Hudson Bay in Canada. Regarding people in this North American Arctic, it's the unique home to many indigenous peoples, including the Athabascans, the Aleut, Inuit, and Yupik, including some Siberian Yupik and Chukotka. With regard to total populations, the North American Arctic is very sparsely populated. Based on a report from the University of Alaska, and if you go just north of the Arctic Circle, there's only about 18,000 people in Alaska, only 16,000 in Canada, and 26,000 in Greenland. And that's compared to 470,000 people in the Scandinavian Arctic and 1.35 million in the Russian Arctic. So it's very, very different in that regard, very sparsely populated. As has already been mentioned, the Arctic climate is warming, but interestingly, in the North American Arctic, at any given latitude, the North American Arctic is generally colder and drier than the Scandinavian Arctic due to the warming influence of the Gulf Stream. So if you go to a place in Norway at the same latitude in the US or Canadian Arctic, much different climate. And interestingly, the North American Arctic is home to the Greenland ice sheet or ice cap, and it's the only one in the Northern Hemisphere. It's generally 2 to as much as 3 kilometers thick. It contains about 684,000 cubic miles of ice, and its surface is roughly 7,000 feet above sea level. And speaking of sea level, if the entire ice sheet were to melt, it would raise global sea level by 24 feet. So this feature is unique in the Northern Hemisphere and is unique to the North American Arctic. What's also unique about the North American Arctic, there's far less infrastructure in our Arctic, civil infrastructure, and in some cases research infrastructure, than in the Scandinavian and maybe even the Russian Arctic. There's a lot less economic activity in the North American Arctic, and this region is of extreme importance to the Russian Arctic, for example. And so in today's discussion, when we think of research infrastructure, we'll really be thinking of things like ships, vessels that do Arctic research. We'll be talking about field stations that have already been mentioned. And we may even be discussing things like satellites, which observe remotely the Arctic region. And there will be other forms of infrastructure too. So the North American Arctic, in sum, is a unique one of the three types of Arctics and warrants really great special attention. And that's what we'll be discussing today. Thanks, Sherry. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, John. Those were excellent introductory comments. And now I'm going to turn the floor over to Josephine Nyman for our first set of remarks.
I will just unmute myself, and so you are able to hear me. Thank you so much for setting up this this discussion. It is really important for us to spread the news about the facilities we actually have in Greenland. And I have put it all together on one map without any names, just to challenge you and to inspire you to go on a homepage. I will show you a little bit later. But I would like to start with one thing that is really important for us in Greenland, actually these last few days. That is, at the bottom of the page, you can see our new research vessel, which will be finished by the spring next year. And we really hope to cooperate with especially Canada on this, because our old ship that doesn't exist anymore was actually for mutual benefit for Canada and us. Apart from that new very big ship, we have a smaller research vessel that is actually also available for cooperation. We don't use it all year round, so there are definitely possibilities to work together on these two ships. If we move on land, as we just heard, it's remoteness and really big areas and huge distances. And that is a challenge for all of us in the north. So if we look at the capital Nuuk, which is at the bottom left side of this slide, then we have, of course, the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources with the facilities that we have. We're about 50 people working here all year round. So there's a bunch of us, and we have close by 20 kilometers from here, a small research station that is also available all year round, even though we mostly work there in the summertime. If we move a little bit further north to Sisimiut, we have the Technical University where they do master's programs and bachelor's programs for Arctic technical engineering. There is the possibility of doing high schools also at the technical level. And it's in close collaboration with the Danish Technical University. So it's a really nice spot to work with permafrost or actually infrastructure. There's also a mining school and other smaller programs. In the Disco Bay, we have the Arctic Station, which is owned by Copenhagen University. It's actually 130 years old, the station now, and it has been used as a research facility ever since it was built. So there's a long history of research in that specific area, and it is you can sign up for room or facility all year round on that spot. They have just got funded for actually expansion. They're building new facilities, new lab facilities. So it will be very much improved within the next few years. There is also a facility at Thule Air Base, or close to Thule Air Base, but it's that's US property, so I will not come into that. I just know that there are some possibilities for working there. If we go in further north, we have Station Noaa, which is the Willem Research Station, which is close to one of the military, Danish military spots. And it's quite new, actually. It's only a few years old. They mostly do atmospheric research there, but you can do anything, and it's possible to go there all year round. If we then go to the east coast, a little bit further down the coastline, we have Sagenberg and Daneborg research facilities. And Sagenberg is actually the first place where we try to set up the ecosystem monitoring program. And it has been running for more than 20 years now, and it is still increasing in capacity and also in monitoring. So there's a whole bunch of work that takes place there, and it's not open all year round, but there are windows at certain times of the year. But it's open for collaboration and for getting access there. A little bit further south on the east coast, we have the Salmon station, which is a few huts, but there's a house, and there are also polar bears, so you need to bring something for protection. But a lot of work has taken place there only in the summertime. Except apart from these facilities I've mentioned here, we have a couple of small huts or houses on different spots, but they are not, it's more a house and a place to stay than a research facility. But that can be really important with the remoteness, and knowing that there's some place you can stay can actually make the difference if you want to go and do some work. So as I said, I didn't put any names on this because I want to challenge you to go into the next slide, where I will show you a web page called the ISAFIC, which means the Arctic Gateway, and it actually shows everything, to be honest. And if you sign up for it, you can click around on the map and you can find research facilities, not only in Greenland, but also, as we heard, the other Arctic places. The Alaska, Canada is getting on the map, and also Scandinavia and Russia. It's not only research facilities you can also find all types of information. You can find partners on specific projects. You can find actually projects. You can get inspiration for whatever you want to be inspired from. So if you sign up on this ISAFIC gateway, you can actually get access to a lot of researchers, a lot of projects, and a lot of research facilities. The partners, as you can see on the bottom of this page, we're actually quite proud to say that the NSF is one of the partners now. All the Arctic related NSF funded projects are actually put on this website now. The plan is that it should also include Alfred Wegener Institute in Germany and some of the Norwegian universities. So there will be actually easy access to a lot of metadata and partners. So go into that website, sign up, and take a look at it. And with that, I will leave it to Bettina to continue.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Josephine. I'm going to make it a future mission to visit at least several of those facilities. But that's great. Thank you for showing us around the Greenland Arctic infrastructure. Bettina, over to you.
Yes, I hope I'm unmuted now. No, the slide before that one. Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for having me today. I am working as the chief of J9, which is in civil language the chief of civilian military corporation at the Danish Joint Arctic Command in Nuuk. And JCO for short is effectively the Danish Defense Operative Command in the Arctic. And as Josephine just mentioned, the remoteness, the scarcity of infrastructure makes it very efficient for our ships, stations, and planes to be able to help out with science. We are represented 10 places in the Kingdom of Denmark. You can see the little red stars, both in Greenland, the Faroe Islands, and in Denmark. So we have primary tasks that we have to see to first, which is surveillance and maintenance of territorial sovereignty, coordinating maritime search and rescue, support to police and local communities, and we are also acting as a Coast Guard responsible for fishery protection and oil spill recovery. I'm just getting a note on getting the microphone a bit over from my mouth. Is this better? I hope so. So when we are performing these tasks, then we offer our logistical platforms to be open to science projects in our area of operation. Our area of operation, you can see on the map, it is the orange line around the Faroe Islands. And then within the EEZ, the Greenland Exclusive Economic Zone, which is more or less also the search and rescue zone around Greenland. So that's where we can that's where our ships are, that's where our planes are working. And as well, you can see our stations, Station Nord, Station Daneborg, and Station Mestersvik, which are all manned stations. And then you can see in the south of Greenland, you can see Grønnedal, and also Gangersløsvik, which is also called Sønderstrømfjord. And there we also have people. And of course in Nuuk, where I am currently living, and then Tórshavn at the Faroe Islands, and then 2 places in Denmark as well. So what we do is that we coordinate requests for support, but we don't validate the scientific projects. So we don't do the vetting. Other people that are scholars and the scientists themselves do that vetting. So this is only for the logistics of it. So if you can show me the next slide. So what do we have to offer? We have all kinds of niceties. So the ship on the top right, that's an ocean frigate, and we have 2 of them in the area of Faroe Islands and Greenland at all times. And the ship at the bottom right is an patrol vessel. It's a bit smaller, but we have 3 of them that also can be used as logistical platforms. The frigates have a Seahawk on board as well. In between the ships, you see a Challenger plane that is used for surveillance. We have a C-1 coming up resupplying the stations. We have the different stations that I just showed you on the map. And then, of course, the Sirius dog sled patrol is also under our command. And they are in very remote areas. So if you need any science done, like at Perryland or anything in that area, we will be happy to look at that as well. So how do you request these platforms for your scientific project? You use ISAFIC, as Josephine was just introducing you to that web page. The Joint Arctic Command and authorities in Denmark, as well as the scientific institutions and universities, are all partners in ISAFIC. And that means that the Danish Defence also is taking part in developing this platform. And when you sign into that platform, you will see apply for support. You click that button and it will talk you right through how to request these access to these platforms that we can offer. Of course, it's very important to keep in mind that our operative task also always goes first. So the science will always, in a way, be done parallel to our primary task. So as a scientist, you can have your project aborted in the sense that if there's a search and rescue operation going on the ship or the plane, we'll have to do that. But we have a great success rate in supporting science, both in the winter time and in the summer. So it shouldn't discourage you from requesting support to join the Arctic Command. Yeah, thank you very much. And back to you, Sherry.
That was great, Bettina. A very vast territory and lots of interesting missions and logistics support you provide there. Martin, take us to Canada.
Thank you. So yeah, so just a short swim to across Baffin Bay. Thank you very much for having me here. I've had the privilege of being the only Canadian on the panel, so I have twice the time and twice the slides. But even then, it's a huge challenge to try to give justice to this extensive network of research infrastructure we have in Canada. You will see that we have very exciting, brand new major investments in infrastructure, but also some stations that are essential that have been running for decades that are really important to keep those time series, especially given what we've been mentioning before, major changes in the system. So next slide, please. So just now that you figure out the map, I'm giving you an exercise to turn it around. And this is another way to look at the north. This is a map from north to south, if you want. So the south being on top of the map. But it's a map that I really like. It's a map that's used by the Polar Continental Shelf Program. And a little bit like was mentioned by the military in Denmark, the logistics and providing infrastructure, planes, etc., is provided by Polar Shelf, which is a civil. It's non-military, but it's been providing support for Arctic research for over 60 years now, and it's really at the core of a lot of the research projects that we're conducting in the Canadian Arctic, especially in the high Arctic. So the base is located in Resolute, right now on the shores of the Northwest Passage, about 75 degrees north. You see it here, the red dot in the middle of the map. But I'd like you to, we talked about the size of Greenland, but I'd like you to maybe get a grasp of the size of the Canadian Arctic. So from a region, southern Hudson Bay, which would be Kujarapik, Wet'magushwi, an Inuit community, and the Cree community, which is, let's say, the southernmost station we have for Arctic research, and then to Wardhunt Island, at 83 degrees north. We have 3,000 kilometers, which is, for people in Washington, D.C., this is like flying to Mexico City or South America. So it gives you an idea of just the size of the area that we have to cover. And like John mentioned, very sparsely populated. Depending on how we define the Arctic, let's say about 100,000 people in the Canadian Arctic, in an area that's 40% the size of our country. And the higher you go, the most sparsely populated in the high Arctic, mostly Inuit regions and dominated by Inuit communities. So no road access except in the Western Arctic. So you can access Inuvik and now access all the way the ocean, Tuktoyaktuk, through highway or gravel highway. But the entire Central and Eastern Arctic is inaccessible by land. You need to take a plane. We also have no deep sea port in the entire Arctic, even though, as you can see, it's really an archipelago and dominated by water, except for Churchill, which has a deep sea port, but is in the southern area of Hudson Bay. So the challenge for accessing these infrastructures is really access. Most scientists come from southern universities or southern governments, as you can see, thousands of kilometers away. And one way is to basically take a commercial flight to Resolute Bay and then be dispatched through mostly Twin Otters or helicopters to different types of infrastructure, whether they're permanent, like I've illustrated just a few here, but the Pearl Research Lab and Atmospheric Research Lab in Eureka, government-owned year-round infrastructure used also by universities and international scientists, up to semi-permanent cabins like Ward Hunt Island, again, at a very crucial place next to those collapsing ice shelves at the top of North America. And then all the way to more seasonal tent-based, either Park Hall or now Weatherhaven tent-based camps that also dominate a lot of the research being done. They can be seasonal, very few are year-round, and some can be dismantled and changed from year to year. So I'll go to, I invite you to check out the Polar Shelf. Basically, their report is pretty impressive to what the amount of research they allow every year. Next slide, please. So we alluded to this before, just a minute, slow transition, okay. So this is, okay, you can turn your brain back to normal with the south being south. So this just gives you an idea, this map gives you an idea of most of the Canadian Arctic research infrastructure, and the operators of this large suite of infrastructure have come together as part of the Canadian Network of North Research Operators, CNNRO. Again, I invite you to visit their website. A bit like the Greenland site, it's a gateway to access mostly information on all the suites of different Arctic infrastructure we have in Canada, from very small camps all the way to major research infrastructure like CHARS. So access this website, you can just click and then you get the information, contact info, website access, or etc. CNNRO is not an entry point to validate or to provide access. It's really just a network. You have to contact mostly individual stations to then get access to. There is no coordinated way to access research infrastructure in Canada. So I'm just showing here an example of the range of types of infrastructure. I'll talk a bit more about CHARS because it certainly deserves its own slide in the next slide. But a lot of the infrastructure is owned and operated by universities in the Canadian Arctic. So Université Laval here has an extensive suite of research stations from 53 North to 83 North. This one here is the one on Violet Island. In Weather Station, University of Manitoba, for example, is just opening a new Churchill Marine Observatory, a unique mesocosm for ice and sea ice research in Churchill, also with a new coastal vessel. McGill has a station on Axel Heiberg. Calgary has the beautiful Kluane Lake in the Yukon Research Station. So a lot of these stations are owned, operated, and funded by universities using soft money most of the time. So that is obviously a challenge that we need to talk about. And last but not least, there are also very important research infrastructure and research institute in the territories themselves that are owned and operated by the regional, territorial, and land claim organizations across the north. So I show here just 3 examples: the Nunavut Research Institute in Iqaluit, the Aurora Research Institute in Nunavut in the Western Arctic, and the Yukon Research Center Whitehorse. Now also, as you may know, Yukon is the first university, Yukon U in Whitehorse. So there are others in Nunavik, in Nunatsiavut, and other Inuit regions that each have their own centers that are very important. They're open permanently, so year-round. They allow also for college level education in most cases, or university now in Whitehorse. Very important for local capacity building in this environment. And again, we mentioned this already, but as far as collaboration is concerned, international collaboration, many of those stations are part of the Interact, EU-led international network for terrestrial research and monitoring in the Arctic. Next slide, please. So this slide illustrates, I guess, the new jewel of the Canadian Arctic. We've heard a lot about the Canadian Arctic Research Station, CHARS. I guess the words, just the images. I encourage you again to go and see. It's run by an organization called Polar Knowledge Canada. So I encourage you to go visit the Polar Knowledge Canada website, and you can actually have a virtual tour, follow the little footstep in this beautiful new infrastructure. It's brand new, was officially opened about a year ago. Unfortunately, given the situation, it's going to take a bit more time before people start using it. It's already being used by local researchers and infrastructure, but this station has been built to welcome the world. So we want to do the best research possible and welcome the international collaborators to use this facility as much as it can be used, and has immense potential, as you can see, both for high-level scientific research, but also it was all designed for co-creation a lot of work with communities and traditional knowledge and education. So it's a very multifaceted community facility now open in Cambridge Bay. Next slide, please. So final slide, but John mentioned, and you showed on the map that the Arctic, the Canadian Arctic at least, is a very marine. The higher you go, especially the archipelago, thousands of islands, the largest, longest Arctic coastline, and almost every single Inuit community is directly on the coast. So we need this research capacity and marine research capacity. Historically, we've been using research or icebreakers. So Canada has a few capable icebreakers, from the Louis Saint-Laurent, the largest one, to smaller research icebreakers. Most Canadian Coast Guard's icebreaker can be mobilized for science. Again, they have a permanent main mandate of icebreaking and capacity in the north, but they can be mobilized for science, and they've been used to do science for many decades. But 20 years ago, we were in 2003, we were able to modify one of the vessels, and is now the Canadian Coast Guard ship Amundsen. It's the only dedicated science icebreaker. It's a cost-sharing agreement with the Coast Guard that owns the vessel, operate and man the vessel. But the entire pool of almost $50 million worth of state-of-the-art equipment is then owned and by University Consortium, and it's managed here at just the office next door to me at Université Laval, but allowing access to international. It's an international infrastructure. So many Greenlanders and Danish and European and US scientists have boarded the Amundsen an overwintering expedition, etc. It's still ongoing. So you can access this directly to the Amundsen, or all the vessels now can be accessed by this Canadian Ocean Infrastructure Portal that was just launched recently to try to coordinate ship time access. And again, internationally, we have to rely on the European Union to organize ourselves, I guess. We can discuss that later. But there is a program called ARICE that helps access from different countries to different icebreakers. So there are major challenge to directly fund research or access to other countries' infrastructure, but ARICE allows us to exchange ship time or berths or ship days between countries. So the Sikuliak, for example, the US icebreaker, can be accessed by Canadians and also Danish icebreaker, and hopefully the new Danish icebreaker will be part of ARICE also. So, but one just final note on this very exciting new capacity that is developing, the coastal research vessels. So there used to be very few of them in the Arctic, and government of Nunavut invested in the Nuliajuk a few years ago. And in the last decade, the fleet has grown a lot, mostly through the investment of the private foundation, actually the research, Arctic Research Foundation, that has joined forces with oceanographers, universities, and local communities to basically modernize and equip for science some coastal ships. And now we have the Marty Bergman in Cambridge Bay, the William Kennedy, a new vessel with the CMO facility in Churchill, the Nahidik is being brought back. So this provides a whole suite of infrastructure for smaller size, let's say, but shallower, and let's say, for example, Hudson Bay, which is a very large bay, but very shallow, provides some capacity for studying a larger extent of this huge territory. So I'll stop here for now, and I'll be happy to participate in the debate or discussions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. That's an impressive set of capabilities. So no one better to follow that than Nettie from the University of Alaska at Fairbanks. Nettie, over to you.
All right, thank you. Similar to my colleagues, I'm going to start with a map that shows a little bit where we are in space. And this is a map of the state of Alaska, but it's also the map of the US Arctic. They are one and the same. So we are an Arctic nation because we have Alaska. And I put the names on many places here. Now, after watching Josephine, I'm a little sad that I did that. I could have done this as an incredible challenge. But I wanted to talk about where we are in our infrastructure in the US. And just to give you an idea of size and expanse, Utqiagvik, formerly known as Barrow, if we put that as far up on the United States as we can, we actually have to slip it a little bit into Canada over Minnesota in order for us to get the rest of Alaska inside the contiguous US, the 48 states, which we refer to as the lower 48. So if you want all of Alaska inside of the map, Utqiagvik is going to be a little bit in Canada. We have Minnesota. To the east, we go out to Georgia. To the west, we go to California. And across the mid-section, if I can call it that, of Alaska, we go from Wyoming through Illinois. So for those of you who are familiar with the contiguous US, keep that in mind as you're looking at what we have and what we would like to have as research infrastructure. As John said at the very beginning, the North American Arctic is pretty sparsely populated, and infrastructure follows population. So it makes sense to me that that we would have only the needed infrastructure in order to support our population. The population of Alaska, if you spread it out over the entire Alaska, we're right about at 1 person per square mile, but that's not actually how the people distribute. So we have about 75% of the people in Alaska live in Anchorage. Fairbanks is the next largest, and then our capital, Juneau, is the next largest, and they are by far the 3 largest cities in Alaska. And if you take this map and you mentally draw a line from Prudhoe Bay down to Fairbanks down to Anchorage, you've drawn a line to what's called the transportation corridor. That's where roads and some railway are accessible to Alaskans. Local roads to the west of that are available within villages to a certain extent. Rivers are roads, so we use rivers. But on the western part of Alaska, there's no connecting roads to connect you back to the transportation corridor. So when we're looking at the infrastructure, for us in the US Arctic, access is a big question, always access. How do we get to where we want to do the research? The research at the University of Alaska Fairbanks is spread all across the North American Arctic. As we heard, we're in Thule in Canada. Honestly, it's global. We view it scientifically as one Arctic. But when we look at the infrastructure that we have here, especially after looking at Martin's slide, I'm particularly jealous of my Canadian neighbor to have the extensive infrastructure that they have. What we have here, we do have long-term ecological research centers we have 4 of them that are across the state of Alaska, and those are marked on here. If you go from south to north, you see the northern Gulf of Alaska has an LTER. That going up a little farther, we have Bonanza Creek LTER, Arctic LTER, and then the Beaufort Lagoon LTER. And I bring your attention to these because these are really important long-term studies that need to continue. And I can't emphasize that enough, because when we start talking about what we want to build and how we want to augment the existing infrastructure, I often get asked, what are you replacing? And the answer is not a thing. We are not replacing anything. We are adding to, we would like to add to our infrastructure. So those long-term research areas are very important to continue for the work that we're doing. The oldest one, the one farther south, northern Gulf of Alaska, that's actually been there since 1970. So for scientists, this is nirvana. You need long-term data in order to do your work. And if you look at this scientifically, the different areas that we have the LTERs are really ecosystem different. They're entirely different from each other, and therefore we need all of them to stay. Now I'm going to take you over up to the north slope of Alaska, and we have in this map we show the different villages that are there. Very important to this entire conversation are the local and indigenous people. I'm a lifetime Alaskan. I've lived here all my life, and so I am very sensitive to including the local and indigenous people into the conversation before you start, not after. We're not going to inform them of what we're doing. We are including them in the development of the research plan as we go forward. They're very much a part of the conversation, and they have They have information and knowledge that goes back thousands of years for the Arctic. Very important to our research. So in Utqiagvik, also formerly known as Barrow, I'm not going to talk too much about it because my colleague Nagruk is on this panel, and he will be talking about the Barrow Arctic Research Center. And also, hugely important infrastructure for what we have here in Alaska. We need that to continue and thrive as it has been. I will bring your attention to Aluktuk Point because I and some of my colleagues here on this panel have been talking about the Prudhoe Bay Aluktuk Point area for a number of years. Sandia National Labs and University of Alaska Fairbanks have been doing collaborative research in that area for many years. Much of it is atmospheric, but we'd like to expand that. Why are we focused on that area? A couple of reasons. One is there's a road to it. Remember I said about the transportation corridor? There's very little places on the north slope of Alaska that you can drive to. You can drive to Prudhoe Bay. It's not easy, it's far, and it's a little bit of a challenging road, but you can drive to it. This is very important in terms of access. And Aluktuk Point does not have a local village there. It is primarily a dew-line site as well as an industrial area close to Prudhoe Bay. So it's a good area for us with the DOE restricted air. And I think my colleague will be talking about that from Sandia. But mostly what I want to say, with looking at this land, we have a lot, and we've done a lot in Alaska over the 100+ years that University of Alaska Fairbanks has been in existence. But we could do more, and we could really augment our ability and access to the North Slope of Alaska if we have a permanent year-round station. So if we go to the next slide. So I just wanted to highlight some of the stuff that we do currently in the Arctic, even without that. So Martin mentioned the Sikuliaq. This is the University of Alaska Fairbanks vessel that is already being put to use in a great way in terms of access to the Arctic. It is ice hardened, and so it has much more capabilities than we've had in the past. But we also spend a lot of time on the ice, in the snow. The ICEX mission is what you see in the center. Geophysical Institute ice specialist was out there helping with predictions, putting in the landing area, and then this is the submarine has surfaced there. There's a lot we can do out on the ice when there is ice, and I guess we'll talk about that too. But helicopters are a really important part of how we access the vast land of Alaska. But we also have to do things that are just kind of out there in the middle of wherever you are. And it requires us to be a little innovative in terms of how do you get power if you're standing miles from infrastructure. How do you have power? How do you have communications? And so a lot of the researchers have actually had to innovate on power and comm just in order to do their work. And so it's not actually the science that they're trying to do, but they have done quite a bit of innovation in the engineering part, just making it happen. But we're also part of the aerospace industry up in Alaska. We have Poker Flat Research Range. We're the only university that has a rocket range, primarily suborbital, that we do it mostly for rural research. And the Alaska Satellite Facility has up in Fairbanks, it's been operating since '91, and we downlink and uplink for NASA as well as other Earth observing systems. And we have a NASA data center that has about 10 petabytes of data currently, primarily synthetic aperture radar data, that is purely for Earth observations and is great for observing polar processes. We also have a quasi, so we have a whole fleet of unmanned aerial systems that are used across the state for research purposes, but we're also using them to teach people in how to use them. So it's part of the training and education, and hopefully putting them into the hands of the VPSOs, the people in the villages who do a lot of the search and rescue. And then I have the balloon research that's actually taken up at a Tech Point with my colleagues, Sandia National Labs. So lack of infrastructure has not actually stopped us from doing research over the years, but it does mean that it takes longer and is more expensive without having a permanent structure. So my big, hairy, audacious goal is to have a permanent year-round facility accessing the North Slope of Alaska in a collaborative way with not only the Sandia National Labs who we've been working with, but other collaborators with the local communities involved in how that gets executed and what that looks like, what kind of data that we'll be gathering and how it gets shared. That's all part of the conversation right now. We have been working towards that idea for several years. We're not there yet. And so that's why it's still a BHAG. But I just want to close out by saying that we already do operations in the Arctic, even with the infrastructure that we have in place now. And as a scientist, I look at all the disciplines that we could be advancing if we had a permanent location. Thank you.
Nettie, that was terrific as always, and thank you for sharing your insight, sharing the map, and also letting us know what you need and what we all need some more of, which is research infrastructure across the American Arctic. Okay, over to you, Nagruk. Tell us, finish us out, and then we'll head into the discussion.
Sounds very good. Hope everybody can hear me okay, and I apologize for moving around there. I don't know if anybody can see me, but the sun happened to just come out. It's been about 2 weeks since I've seen it, so it's good to see it, although it was right in my face as we started talking. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody today about North American Arctic research infrastructure. I hope that at the end of this, it leaves a lot to be desired. That's kind of the point. There is some infrastructure, but definitely what it could be. Preface the discussion with a little bit of history briefly on research in the Arctic, specifically in Nutqarvik, or it says Barrow on this map. We have been, as an Indigenous community, we have been fortunate to have access to Arctic research for quite some time. Dates back to the first International Polar Year, 1881. John Murdoch, doing ethnographic studies, was here for 2 to 3 years, working with locals, recording a lot of data. So we've had interaction for a long time. Moving quickly on into 1944, the Arctic Research Lab was established to look for oil in the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. The first researchers arrived at that station in Nutqarvik in 1947. There were 6 researchers when that first opened. That was quickly followed, or by 1966, there was over 200 researchers here. And the Noaa campus is where I'm sitting right now, which is about a 2-minute drive from the local community of Nutqarvik that has always been there. After that, it left the hands of the military. It moved into the research lab, was then operated by University of Alaska Fairbanks for a long time, and then it was shut down. But the research still kind of continued. 1971, the North Slope Borough, they were established, and they started the North Slope Borough Department of Wildlife, where they kind of spearheaded co-production. If you ever want an example of what co-production should be, you just need to look at the North Slope Borough Department of Wildlife Management. Also in the 70s, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was signed into law, which established the company that I have the privilege of working for, which is the Nutqarvik Inupiaq Corporation. It is the village corporation for the village of Nutqarvik. We own 226,000 acres of land, and also now own the Noaa campus as well as the Barrow Arctic Research Center. Part of that 226,000 acres. If you look at the little insert on the right, is the Barrow Environmental Observatory. It's been recently renamed to the Charles E. Tuke Edwardson Barrow Environmental Observatory. It's 7,466 acres of land that our corporation and the North Slope Borough, who is the local municipality, set aside, specifically zoned only for scientific research. There will be no development of permanent infrastructure or anything like that. It's specifically for scientific research. On the right side of that, we recently have been working with the Corps of Engineers to open up a wetlands mitigation bank, which will also further protect that land from development, making that data that has been being gathered from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even prior available for many years to come, which is a lot of the reason why people want to come up here. If we go to the next slide. So now to kind of talk about the infrastructure more specifically, now that I gave kind of a brief overview there. On the top left is the Narl campus in its prime. The building on the bottom, the kind of H-shaped building, was built in 1963 or 69. You can see that it's up on pilings. There was a big storm in 63 that basically flooded Narl and moved a lot of the Quonset huts off of their foundations and things. A lot of those Quonset huts have been taken down and removed. Some of them are still there. We are still utilizing those buildings that were built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s to conduct some of the research right now, which speaks to the need for upgrades. On the bottom left is another picture. It's just an aerial shot of the same campus, Narl and part of it. On the top right there, kind of modernizing here, that is the new Barrow Arctic Research Center. I am sitting in that facility right now. That was completed in 2007. It was the result of a meeting of researchers and locals, basically talking about what are those infrastructure needs? What do we need to be able to conduct good science in the Arctic? And this facility that I have the privilege of sitting in was a result of those discussions. Right below that, I'd like to everybody to focus on that. And I wish I had another slide, I would have made it bigger, but this was the original plans. There was 5 phases. We're sitting in phase 1 right now. And so phase 1 was built. There was 5 phases originally planned. We're still on phase 1, and this was done in 2007. The funding for upgrading the original Narl campus kind of went away, unfortunately, with the passing of the late Senator Ted Stevens. So we're still sitting in phase 1. There are plans out there to expand and improve that infrastructure, and we need funding to do it. I'd also like to point to some of the other infrastructure up here in the middle left, bottom middle, is the Noaa Earth Systems Research Laboratory. And right below that on the bottom is the new building that is going up. And it's actually being constructed by UIC Construction as a small business sole source contract. We're actually doing the construction of that new facility. We work with those guys as much as we can. Brian Thomas is the manager out there. Whenever we're doing outreach and engagement with the community, he is always more than happy to participate, help us working with kids, things like that. If you can see, and I apologize, Lori, didn't do it justice, but just above the Noaa site on the bottom, on the top of that picture is the DOE ARM site. It's been there since 1977. We're working directly with DOE ARM to provide the services that they have there. We have 3 full-time staff plus a project manager that provide year-round support for them. Saves them a lot of money. It provides that local capacity building, and that's one of the things I wanted to highlight with respect to the infrastructure talk is research has been providing economic opportunities, at least up here, and I'm sure in other areas, for a very long time. And providing opportunities that might not otherwise be there if there wasn't that research going on. Every time I see a dot on all these maps that everybody put up, I see it as an opportunity to further provide those economic opportunities to local people, which are a lot of the times local Indigenous people, and even more so, I would say that a lot of them are in economically disadvantaged zones where there probably aren't a lot of jobs. We have operations in Utqiagvik, Alaska, which is about 60 miles south of here. We lease a house and provide as many jobs as we can throughout the year. Mostly it's in the summertime. We have capabilities of reaching out to other villages. Although there is not permanent infrastructure, whenever we're going to another village and we're doing, and there's a researcher that wants to do work, we try to hire locally as much as possible instead of sending our staff out there to do the work because they need it. One last picture that I'll talk about is on the top right of the slide. This is an ice cellar that was built in the early Gnarl days for actually storing all of the food, the winter supplies for the Gnarl campus. I am working on a proposal to the National Science Foundation to excavate that ice cellar and hopefully get it back to a point where we can continue to use that for research. So as a local corporation, we're planning on, we're okay with making investments into that research because we've seen the benefits of that collaboration. So that's kind of that highlight, and I just want to emphasize that economic opportunity and a lot of the collaborations that happen with these. A lot of the science that goes on, it's not directly influencing that community necessarily, right? That's not always that collaboration. The collaboration could be jobs, it could, which is really important to us. I've got 20 full-time staff here in Barrow that might not otherwise have that opportunity. So I really want to emphasize that every dot on that map is an opportunity for collaboration, research, and economic development with respect to infrastructure. Thank you.
John, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you all speakers very much for that whirlwind tour of all your infrastructure. And my head is spinning with the amount of things that you've told me. So I'd want to start us off. We have about, say, 25 minutes for some discussion. And the first question I would ask you is, we've heard a lot about what you do have. But what I'm wondering is, what's the highest priority from your research communities, both domestic and international, with respect to that infrastructure? Does what you currently have fit that community's needs, or is it insufficient? So in other words, is our collective Arctic research infrastructure a good fit for what the scientific research community seeks? And if not, if it isn't a good fit, what do we need to do to make it a better fit? And I'll start off with one example. The U.S. recently lost the use of our U.S. Coast Guard cutter Healy for our marine Arctic research. So we are desperately in need of a research vessel to conduct a lot of the marine-based research. So that's just one example, but I'd like to hear from you. So please. Okay, I'll call on Martin then. Martin, you're on mute.
Look at a draw. Thank you, John. Again, that's an interesting question because as you can see from my presentation, Canada does have a pretty large, extensive Arctic research infrastructure network. Polar Knowledge Canada, CHARS, obviously it's a $200 million investment, but there is always need for more or maybe more adaptable. So I think the main thing is that research questions, research issues will change and evolve over time. And we need to have these infrastructure also able to evolve and be adaptable to the needs and demands. So you mentioned ships, for example. Before we had the Amundsen for Canadian Arctic researchers to oceanographers to access vessels, we had to mobilize Coast Guard, which are civil ships that were not built at all for science. And we basically needed to bring a winch from there, or rosette from there, etc., and try to mobilize a crew. So now we have the Amundsen, which is a dedicated ship, but the demand far exceeds what we can offer. So the vessel is operational for science about half of the year. And then it does Coast Guard operations in the winter, and there is certainly a need for more. We have some vessels on the line, but these, some of them are not necessarily with a research focus. We may have some large research infrastructure, but this will come in many, probably decades now, but many years from now. So, and on the terrestrial side, again, I think, I don't know if we need more infrastructure. We maybe need invest in better networking, better access to infrastructure. I mentioned polar shelf. If you close down polar shelf, then you close down the bloodline to all these stations. And the polar shelf program has been operating on a very small budget for many years now, and a lot of it cost recovery. But it is the central nervous system of the entire Arctic research, where it's a bit like Greenland. If they didn't have the military, you need to access these remote infrastructure. And I think that's better coordination, modernization, and better use of merging data sets, etc. So not only internationally, but even nationally, I think we all have a better job to do at making sure we do that. So I would not be necessarily prone to invest a lot in new infrastructure, modernize what we have. We do have new stations coming with great ideas, capacity, for example, to access the ocean, deep ocean without ships. There's only the Eastern Arctic where we can access deep ocean, Baffin Bay, across from Greenland, and we don't have a station there close to the shore. So we're trying to build a station where we could access deep ocean on the ice in winter without ships. So that's one aspect, for example, very specific. But I think right now capacity, CHAR is one of the priorities to make sure that we use and operate CHARs and maximize its use and international research collaboration. That's certainly a priority for Canada also.
Thanks, Martin.
So I'd like to jump
Nettie.
in for the US, and I will say we do not have the infrastructure in place that we need. I think, like I said, we are still doing a lot of research in the Arctic and in the subarctic of Alaska, and we're working across the state in various ways, working with what we have. It would be much better for us if we could have additional infrastructure to what we have now. What BARC brings with UIC science is incredibly important. We wouldn't be able to operate up there without UIC, and we really appreciate the work that they do with us and the collaborative spirit that comes with it. We want to see more collaboration with other villages across the North Slope, and I think that part of the conversation, the bringing in the local and Indigenous people, is as important to the conversation as the building of the infrastructure. So we have to focus on collaboration, co-production, respectful interaction, and bringing the local Indigenous voice in. That being said, we do need more infrastructure for research. A facility that could be operated year-round is much more useful to many different disciplines in science than a camp that you go to for a week or two. And so that's why we're looking at the North Slope. And there is a question asking if we've been looking at the Chukchi-Bering Strait area. We do have quite a bit of science being done in that area, but we have not, I have not, as a scientist, focused on getting a permanent facility there. But you're right, Matt, you're right. We need that too. I'll stop because Nagrick wants to say something.
I was gonna jump in there, John, if I might. One of the things that comes to mind when you ask what is there, I feel like we're making it work, and I hate doing that. I hate having to make something work with the resources that we have here. It feels like and we are making it work, and the researchers that come up here that we're supporting, they're doing world-class research, right? So imagine the level of research that could potentially come out of some newer facilities, of some facilities that complement the BARC, updated facilities, more connectivity, things like that. That's kind of what what I feel like is if the work that's coming out of here is that good, how much better can it be if we didn't have to make it work, if it just worked? That's what I'd like to say on that.
Could we perhaps, John, ask Lori Parrott from Sandia to weigh in here on building on the comments that Nettie and Nagruk have made about a high Arctic research center, which they've all been involved with developing the concept for.
Thank you. Thanks, Sherry. Thanks for the opportunity. We have partnered with UIC for over 20 years and with University of Alaska Fairbanks for maybe even longer on a variety of research. And the work I support is for the Department of Energy atmospheric radiation measurement. And we discovered that the Aliktok Point area has unique and complementary features that can add to missing observational measurements for the Beaufort Sea area and add some unique capability for North American Arctic research infrastructure in that we manage restricted airspace 700 miles out over the Arctic Ocean. That's a unique area to test technology without interfering with industrial or commercial air traffic. We also think that the road access up from Fairbanks to the Prudhoe Bay offers a way to reduce the cost of operating science and staging logistics, not only for partners in Western Canada, but for partners in Northern Alaska to do additional research. And so we've been exploring this concept of trying to bring these unique assets and with a long view. Let's look out decades. How is the North American Arctic going to change? And what is the science community going to need in 10, 20, 30 years? Because we know what an investment Arctic research infrastructure is. You've all worked hard on establishing the capabilities you have, and it takes a long time to invest and build and get them to be used. So that's the value proposition we've been interested in exploring, to think about how can this add to the capabilities of the North American nations. Over to you. Thanks.
I want to give an opportunity to our Greenlandic colleagues. But before I do that, since we've heard about, each of you has talked about, Nagruk started with something at Bark. We've heard about Aliktoks moving to the east. We've heard about Chars moving further to the east again, all the way to Zackenberg on the far east. So we have essentially a string of pearls, if you will, of high Arctic research stations. So I would ask, starting with my Greenlandic colleagues, what does a collection of these stations together give us more than any one individual station, that because of the totality of them, that we can address something that's very important to the North American Arctic rather than just the North Slope of Alaska or Cambridge Bay area or the east coast of Greenland? If you have some thoughts on that, how we can answer broader questions, whether it's meteorology, please tell me what your thoughts might be on that. Thank you.
Yes, maybe I can start on that one. It's quite obvious that with all this, this meeting is facilitating and showing that there are all these possibilities, and we can actually work together much more and do comparisons and do mutual projects. So the results will be so much better and more applicable at all different levels. So of course, if you have access to these pearls along the line, as you call it, it will give so much more to each project involved. And one of the things we have been struggling with, or we are struggling with, is it's not that the lack of facilities. I mean, we have been offered from foreign countries a lot of research infrastructure, places to be built, but we have actually no thank you to those offers, because we don't have the resources to maintain those facilities. So we lack the daily maintenance and so on for the research facilities we already have at the moment. So it's I think I am in line with Canada on this, that we have a lot of research facilities and we have access to research facilities in other places, but we just do not have the resources to actually do the work that we would like to do.
You know, that's an excellent point. And I'd refer back to a comment that Martin Fortier made about the way the EU, a non-Arctic participant in this discussion, has been very successful at organizing Arctic research infrastructure efforts, such as the ARICE icebreaker project, such as the Interact and Interact 2, and so on. Also within Scandinavian countries, Nordforsk does a very good job of funding Nordic countries things. So it seems in North America, we don't have a common funding pot. Maybe it's a matter of funding mechanisms that are a challenge for us across our three entities. Martin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, sure I do. For sure, well, you know, one could say the Europeans also, most of the European countries don't have access to the Arctic, so they need to coordinate with other countries to access the Arctic. That's one, I know that's not the major cause, but it's true that just the way the EU is you know, the EU itself opened this ease of collaboration with joint funding, you know, mechanisms and alignments. And we know this has been a very difficult aspect when we try to do international collaboration, even with IPY. The last IPY, you know, it's just over 10 years ago, major investment, Canada, I think over $150 million, but mostly for Canadian scientists to work in Canada. It was very difficult to coordinate with other programs because of different funding mechanism, timing, etc., rules of not, you know, spending money outside your own country, and we all have to deal with these issues. So I think these EU-led, and there are other, you know, organizations that have been going on for a long time, trying to better coordinate Arctic effort and get a pan-Arctic view of the Arctic. And I think this is extremely important for us. And many scientists, I think that way, look at the Arctic as a global area. And not only, you know, obviously there are very important local issues, but it's also a major part of our global system. And but when we get down to it, with all the intent that we have, the plan, the roadmaps that we have to go ask for funding at individual research funding organization, whether it's NSF or for us, NSERC, et cetera. And that is very difficult then to coordinate together. It does happen. We have led, each of our country has had major program, whether now it's, you know, icebreakers being, you know, overwintered in the Arctic Ocean, welcoming the world. Germany did it, Canada did it, the US did it. But these are kind of ad hoc opportunities. The day-to-day, I think the big issue with research infrastructure, we've talked about all of this infrastructure, but who uses that infrastructure and who funds the use of these infrastructure? For university, it's soft money. So cycles of soft money, trying to maintain these icebreaker operations or research station on grants and individual researchers sometimes is a huge challenge for this, trying to coordinate at a long-term collaborative effort with international Arctic countries. But I think Asia also, China, Korea, there are lots of new players with huge capabilities that are also joining in this global effort. I think that increases the challenge, but also the value of international collaboration in Arctic research.
Thanks, Mark. You know, I don't want this to sound like we just have so many challenges and not good opportunities. So I'd like to put in a plug for two things that might help us improve our coordination and cooperation among the North American parties. One of them is the Arctic Science Ministerial, which happens every 2 years. The next one's scheduled to be in Japan in May. We'll see if that continues to be planned in person or not. But that's an excellent opportunity where the science ministers from over 26 countries come together. And they did talk about Arctic research infrastructure at the last one. Perhaps we could have a sidebar of just the nations in the North American Arctic at that event. So that is an opportunity of high-level leaders to come together and maybe talk on a regional perspective. The other thing that I think is important is that in 2018, the 8 Arctic nations signed an international scientific cooperation agreement, a legally binding document that gives us an opportunity to exercise that agreement. And we can do that also at the regional level rather than necessarily at the Pan-Arctic. So they've given us a hunting license, if you will, and we just need to go out and begin to use that. So there's some very good words in that agreement. A lot of time was spent negotiating it. And if we put some efforts behind it, we have a vehicle perhaps that we could do more when it comes to infrastructure. Let's see. There was a question that we had about, I think it's interesting. All of you mentioned how military infrastructure in the North sometimes has a dual use capability for scientific research to be done as well, whether it was stations, whether it was a dew line, whether it was a bunch of other things. And I was very interested in my last visit to Thule Air Base, which was mentioned by our Greenlandic colleagues, that the mission statement for the 821st Air Base Group, which runs Thule, is that the mission is to enable force projection, space superiority, and scientific research in the Arctic region for our nation and allies through integrated base support and defense operations. Aliktok Point also was originally an airstrip and air infrastructure. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us, particularly as our collective military groups grow more and more interested in this region and understanding it, that we can take advantage of that curiosity and that thirst for knowledge to make dual use opportunities of either infrastructure or desire. And I'm wondering if anyone has any comments on that topic.
Yeah, thank you, John. I would like to make a comment. Just this summer, actually 2 weeks ago, I was on a patrol with one of our patrol vessels called Knud Rasmussen, and we supported different projects on new ice charts in cooperation with the Office of Naval Research, the US, North American Ice Service, US National Ice Service, and the US Coast Guard, and Danish Meteorological Institute. And just to emphasize that the coordination and cooperation sort of nationally, but also internationally, is I think key to use all the infrastructure that is already there. Also what Josephine said, that in Greenland we actually do have a lot of assets. We just need to coordinate how to use them. And that also goes for international interest in these assets. And again, use isafic.org to access these platforms. We in the Danish Joint Arctic Command are working very well with US Coast Guard and US military, same with Canadian, with Canada and France. And we see an increased number of ships and collaborations also with planes and other assets. I guess because the Arctic is sort of getting very hot in all kinds of manners, but also sort of in interest, and we see that military-wise, that more we get more visits, which basically means that there will be more platforms to do research from. In a way, if you can access them. And I don't know how that works in France or Canada, but it should be possible to use these platforms as well as Alert or Eureka in Canada. I know the military as well. In Thule, I've myself worked at Thule Air Base for 6 years and know a lot of researchers that came up there funded by the NSF. And I know for a fact that during those 6 years, the collaboration with the US Air Force became more and more positive. And the access to the base actually meant that they had a whole barracks to themselves, all the different researchers coming up. So for me, it makes very good sense to pool instruments, scientific instruments, and also different research projects on military ground in the Arctic, because it's very remote, it's without access, and if we can just collaborate on these things, I think it will benefit, like you just said on Thule, it will benefit both parties. Thank you.
And if you don't mind me taking what Bettina said and moving it over to the US, one of the things that I loved about your presentation, Bettina, is that you showed where your patrol is around all of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. In the United States Arctic, the U.S. Coast Guard is responsible for patrolling the coastline of Alaska, but they don't have their assets staged in the Arctic itself. It's down in Kodiak and in the Juneau area. It'll take, I think, and Laura, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking it's about 2 to 3 days if they are in the Gulf of Alaska for them to get to the Arctic. And for those of you who've ever fallen in a river in the north, you know that you have about 15, maybe 20 minutes, not 2 to 3 days. So for search and rescue for us, it's also a concern. And right now, the Sikuliaq is one of our best waterborne assets that we have. We are in the US sorely hurting for icebreakers and such across, not just for research, but across the military as well. So I don't want it to sound like it's hopeless. I agree with Nagruk. We're making it work, right? We're making it work, but wouldn't it be nice if duct tape wasn't your main tool when you're going into the Arctic?
Yes, we have baling wire too, I think. So
John, just to compliment this for Canada, I don't want to end on this, but just to mention on the military part that our military presence is relatively low, I would say, and there is alert and Eureka, but there is very few. Our Coast Guard is civil, as you know, so Coast Guard is part of Fisheries and Oceans Department, so it's really played a major role in ocean Arctic research, but it's not military. And the same way with the military in the Arctic, we rarely work with them as far as research capacity. So there may be some transportation on Hercules, etc., with Polar Shelf, but it's not a very well-used collaboration with research with the military in Canada.
Okay, thank you. I feel like we could go on for another hour. I very much enjoyed our discussion. Thank you so much, panelists. And now I want to hand it back to Sherry as our rapporteur and concluding remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, very much for excellent moderating. And thank you, Mike, for bringing this all together. And I want to thank all the panelists for your super insightful discussions, and Lori from Sandia for helping to bring us all together, originally designed for the Arctic Circle meetings. And now to summarize really what all of you have said, and I also want to tip my hat to Michaela at the Wilson Center, who's been thinking along with me as we've done that. We're very happy to have you at the Wilson Center now. Each of us, everyone's talked about their Arctic research infrastructure, and the challenges are different in each country. I feel as an American, we long for that modernized infrastructure we see in Canada and in Greenland. But now some of you need more operational support, more networking and access in Canada, some more resources. So we all have needs, but my vision is this string of pearls. And I think Martin used the phrase, that the dew line used to stretch across, Alaska, Canada, and Greenland, primarily designed to enable us to track Russian or then Soviet nuclear missiles coming across the US, but it also provided valuable observations of a variety of types. We need a research infrastructure that reflects our modern needs. And most of those are about observations of the changing Arctic. And so that's going to be very important. That's the first point. The second is this collaboration with the non-research partners that each of you have talked about. It can be an economic opportunity. It can help us enhance our security agendas and our security needs. And indeed, there's lots of good research that's done in many of our government agencies, for example, the Department of Defense in the US and others. And so we need that non-research. We need to understand where things are going. And finally, our allies and partners are vitally important. We are all together as a unit, but we need, of course, to continue to work internationally and help synthesize and draw together these various efforts, perhaps through the next Arctic Science Research Ministerial or other forms where we get the continuing co-benefits of that research. So with that, I want to thank all of our panelists, our participants for being part of this today, wherever you are, and the team at the Wilson Center for making this possible.